Welcome to the Consumer Code Show, where we believe that humans are incredible and we are living in the first era in history where behavioral data and AI have hit scale so we can go from consumer insight to business activation in no time. In this show, we explore the world of retail through the lens of demography, cartography, ethnography, and the economy. So without further ado, let's get into this episode. Well, welcome to the show, everyone. As you know, I am always interested in understanding the history of geodemographics. I've had characters like Richard Weber, who created Acorn and Mosaic in the 70s, Michael Weiss, who's involved in early days of Claritas. And you can't go too far in a conversation about the early days of geodemographics without hearing the name Jan Kestle. So Jan Kestle is the president of Environics Analytics. She is one of the most highly respected people in the industry, and I'm going to be interviewing today about her career in the intersection of geodemographics. So before we get into that, Jan, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm very, very pleased to be here, and I'm so delighted that you're shining a light on the role of geodemographics for businesses, especially at a time when data are so important to businesses and their outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just excited to learn because I know you got pieces of the puzzle that I have not heard. So I'm pumped for that. Before we get into it, can you give the audience a high level overview of what Environics Analytics does?
Environics Analytics is the leading provider of what we like to call third-party data in Canada. So we've been in business for 22 years. We have over 1,000 customers and thousands of users. People engage with us at a $500 level and a $1 million level. So we provide insights about consumers and about locations, and we enable customers to combine their data with our data so that they can enhance their data, or they can also look at consumer behavior from the point of view of how consumers engage with them. And our data, I like to say, serves as the denominator, so we can tell you an awful lot about people's demographics, about their behavior, about their wealth status, about their mindset, about how they interact with governments. So we provide a broad set of data that is proprietary to us for the most part. We put it into a platform that enables customers to combine their data with our data and then create outcomes that they can go and implement in location, in merchandising, in messaging. And then finally, in the last couple of years, we've expanded to take that core insights business, which is founded in geodemography, but kind of extended, to take those insights that people can know about their users or their donors, or from government point of view about residents, take that insight and actually activate against it in the digital advertising system. And then finally, we have developed what we call a neutral middleware for Canada, leveraging what we can do in terms of clean room and identity resolution in Canada so that people can measure whether or not their insights and their activation actually worked. So insights to activation to outcomes measurement, that's what we do.
Man, it's unbelievable what you've been able to build. And I feel like there's two words I think about when I think of Environics. It's trust and respect. So I got a lot of respect for you for building the company that you have. And you've taken this from its earliest days. As soon as the geodemography started, you were somewhat involved. Can you kind of tell us about your intersection with geodemographics in the beginning of your career?
Sure. Actually, I put the beginnings of geodemographics to the late 60s, early 70s, when the Claritas people and the Acorn and Mosaic people were getting started. During those days, I was actually getting a good grounding by working for the Ontario Statistical Centre, which was the kind of mini StatsCan in the province of Ontario. And statistics is a federal responsibility in Canada. So we were quite small, but eventually, so to back up a little bit, I graduated the math and physics degree. And, I always like to remind people there were 4 women in the graduating class of 150. And so women in STEM is a very important cause for me from then till now. But so it was a little difficult to get a job with a math and physics degree, an applied math degree from the College of Science. So the first job I got was acting as an editor on surveys for the provincial government. And I did end up working for the government for almost a couple of decades. Say, well, you work for the government, then you left and you went to work for this tiny data company and then you started your own business. That's kind of an odd career path. But the truth is that when I was working for that government, I learned how to do edit and imputation on a survey. I learned how to link survey data with administrative and postal code data in the early days. I learned how to take data and tell a story with it because in those days, being a province, we did federal provincial negotiations. I had to represent the health department, the social services department, the economists, the financial transactions departments in negotiating with the federal government about what kind of data would be collected. So I see that as a continuum because I really got to understand how to tell stories with data. But after I kind of went from being an editor and surveys to running that statistical shop for Ontario and doing a lot of work with the federal government in the 70s and early 80s around what kind of data were needed. I was aware that people were using what we called small area data, census data, for some really interesting purposes. And in Canada, a company called CompuSearch, which is founded in 1975. So that's after Claritas and Acorn and CCN, which is really what eventually became Experian. They were trying to bring to Canada some of those same kinds of tools, which leveraged if you know where people live, then you can make some inferences about what they're likely to do. Now, my involvement with geodemography formally started in 1988 when CompuSearch, which was kind of the Claritas equivalent of Canada, decided that to get beyond putting a dot on a map and helping people understand who lives in their trade area, they wanted to branch out into other industries. So they hired me to take what they were doing for retailers and adapt it to governments. And at the same time, they hired someone from the consumer packaged goods industry, someone from financial services. So to me, that was when, even though I was aware of what was happening, that was when I really had to take these amazing databases and figure out how to help answer questions for government departments in my portfolio, but in the broader sense. One of the things, Canada's a pretty small market, so we're about 10%, the size of the US in terms of business. And we have a huge landmass. So when you start to think about where people live and how that impacts marketing campaigns, advertising campaigns, site location, government programs, the grounding that I had in understanding, neighborhood census data and how that could be leveraged to help put things in the right place or get the right message to the right people, it came together. And I was so fascinated by what Bill Goldstein, who was the founder of CompuSearch in Canada, had done basically through his associations with Richard Weber and the team that led Claritas to say, how can we build not only a view of neighborhood demographics, but how can we use the power of place? People talk about birds of a feather flock together and location, location, location. And I love the slogans because they kind of get at the essence. When I left government and started to work at CompuSearch and started to study geodemography, I learned that writings out of the University of Chicago School of Human Ecology in the 60s said, if you really do understand where people live, you can make inferences. So fast forward to 10 years later, when Bruce Carroll came to Canada to take over running CompuSearch, he had been a founder of Claritas and there during the very early days of Prism. And he also introduced us to Robin Page, who was an ad executive who had joined Claritas in the early days. And I remember some of the basics that they taught us said, people, we knew birds of a feather flock together, but when you think about it more deeply, people live in locations that have attributes and people and shopping and convenience that either are the attributes that are like them. So they move into a neighborhood because this is my kind of neighborhood, or they move into a neighborhood because this is a neighborhood that they want to be like. So it's aspirational as well as actually deterministic. And then the other interesting thing that Robin taught me is, and not only that, but when you move into a neighborhood, just the way human nature is, you tend to adapt to the neighbor, you tend to change to be like that
Totally.
neighborhood.
Yep.
So these were great conceptual learnings that enabled us to think, well, how do we make products that align with that? And of course, you know, we had the opportunity in Canada to look at what was happening in the US. There was Claritas, and not only Bruce and Jonathan and Sam Barton, these guys had done amazing work, but they were taking the sort of clustering, in other words, classifying neighborhoods into groups of people that have a high degree of similarity within the group and a high degree of differentiation between the groups. They were doing that in a way to tell interesting things. And I always say the profile is just a vehicle to get to connection. So we got
Mm.
a chance to see the advances in the US and in the UK because even though we were separate companies, there was something of an international network. Lots of brands, and we still see this today. Brands are global. So they want to be able to do in Canada what they were doing in the US. They want to be able to do in the US what they were doing in the UK. So there was always I was so privileged to have a lot of interaction with all those guys. So I started in 1988 at CompuSearch. I worked the government sector, enabling the products to be adapted for government and public policy uses. Then I started to lead product. And when it gets to about the early 90s, remember this now, before that, we were running things on mainframe computers. We were using timeshare with the University of Toronto. The first segmentation system that we built for Canada ran on a timeshare machine for 2.5 weeks.
Oh
One
my gosh, I
solution
did not know that.
called Lifestyles. And one solution, and we used it for a couple of years. Now, because there were no microcomputers, there was no large relational databases. You have to remember all this stuff that these pioneers built. There was no GIS mapping system. So
Yeah, that's right.
in the early 90s, everybody was getting desktop computers. And so we had, cluster systems. We had linked cluster systems to surveys. So we could say, if you have a good, reliable national survey, 20, 50,000 respondents, and you put demographics into that, then if people behave according to their type, which generally they do, and we can prove that. So you have a large survey and these kind of people do this kind of thing. And when you look at these kind of people live in this neighborhood, then you can make a good statistical inference about what people are likely to do. Sometimes when people think about geodemography, they think just about the cluster systems or the segmentation systems, but the real power is leveraging the other data that's in the marketplace through partners. So, Claritas partnered with the MRI and the Siemens of the day, and Experian had some of their own surveys, but also partnered with international market research firms. And in Canada, we partnered with the Print Measurement Bureau and, the Bureau of Broadcast Measurement, which is now our Numeris and Vividata, so that we could take behavior surveys and project them right down to the postal code. And why do you want to do that? Well, a couple of reasons. First of all, you want to look at local behavior, but you also want to be able to integrate this great wealth of data from all this rich survey work into your own customer database. So if you fast forward to early 90s, we got desktop mapping, and then late 90s, we got the CRM. So all of these advances in technology made it possible for researchers to do more. But I think the key is that the geodemographics industry and the organizations that you've mentioned, with the leaders that you've mentioned, Richard certainly was very advanced in building a technology for capturing customer data in the direct marketing business. So in the UK, CCN had a geodemographic market analysis system for profiling, but they also had a direct marketing system for doing custom clustering, defining campaigns, doing reach and lift analysis, that combination. The US, Claritas and Donnelly Marketing invented desktop systems that enabled customers to have all of the geodemographic system on the desktop. And in Canada, we originally partnered with Donnelly and brought a system to Canada from them. And then we built our own called Market Math. So there's data, and then there's what you ought to do with it. And, so a lot of people think of the geodemographics firms as the data supplier, but in fact, there's very specific, we call prescriptive or bespoke pieces of functionality. How do you create a profile? What do you use as the numerator and the denominator? After you create a segmentation of your customers, do you target to the high ground, or do you target to every segment according to what their potential is? So what Bruce Carroll did when he came to Canada after all of his experience in the US was he helped us understand what functionality we needed to put in software. And in those days, it was desktop software.
How
So
did
that,
Bruce Carroll have a good understanding of the use cases?
well, Bruce had he joined Claritas after a career in journalism, and he was a founder of Claritas. He helped build the early Prism system. But what Bruce was, and Bruce and I became lifelong friends. And I sit and when I build new things, and the guys on our team at Environics build new things, I think, oh my God, Bruce would have loved this, because Bruce would literally jump up and down when you showed him new functionality of what you could do with geodemography. And so he could come into a room and say, here's what people need in terms of real world business problems, and then he
Okay.
could challenge us. I worked for him. So when he came to Canada, he was recruited to come to Canada after he had Claritas had been sold, and he was doing a few different things. But he was originally Canadian, and spent a long part of his career with Claritas in the U.S. But he came back to Canada, and kind of at the same stage as we were building more user centric software for Canada, and he took over CompuSearch, and he did a couple of key things. First of all, as I mentioned, he could conceptualize a product and then challenge the techie people to create that business use case. He brought business and customer centricity
Okay.
into the bunch of geeks.
But now how do you do that as a journalist? Like, how did he, because he's definitely talking to customers, because you don't come up with the problems unless you have a deep understanding.
Well, he was a journalist, and then he had 20 years with Claritas, so he took that.
Yeah, and the
That
journalist is also, he's asked
he's
good questions and he
he's
finds the lead.
a storyteller. He's curious. But basically, I think all of the people that I could point out, Bill Goldstein was a founder of CompuSearch, and great. And Bill and Bruce worked very well together. Bill was much more on the techie side. He wrote programs for those old mini computers he powered a mapping system, a pen-based mapping system, before we had GIS systems to create maps.
He put a dot on a map. He put a
He
dot on a
did.
map on a
He
computer,
did.
yeah.
He did. So that whole period in the early 90s, when technology was enabling geodemography to do more things, we started, I mentioned earlier that Richard Weber was then at CCN. He had been in the beginnings of uh, CACI, which produced Acorn, and then he went to CCN, built Mosaic. And he was also ahead of his time at investing in technology to enable the data. And if I can just flash forward to now, where people say, oh, well, the data are so important in AI, and we take the AI, it's doing amazing things in our business and in the rest of the sort of data and analytics space. But the key thing, whether you're using AI or whether you're using traditional statistical tools, is to make sure that the methodology that's embedded in your technology is giving you the best practice. And secondly, to make sure that you're using the best version of the data. All data are not
That's
created
right.
equal.
Yes, I
So
feel like especially
what I
with AI and LLMs, the way I kind of describe it is, it used to be when you were inaccurate, but the speed of the data would go one revolution, right? And you would be 1 degree off. Now it can go 100 revolutions. And if you're 1 degree inaccuracy, and when you're trying to go to Canada, you end up in India. That's how I would kind of describe now that we've put, powerful statistics and LLMs on it.
Yeah. Well, I saw a study about a week ago. I'm sorry, I can't remember where it was. But then I went back and I looked up. I have a binder of newsletters, geodemographic newsletters that we put out, monthly glossy magazines that we put out in the 90s. And there was almost the same article. And here's the little nugget in it, that the quality of the data is the thing that really determines the outcome of a model. That the modeling technique being better, which of course there's been so much progress with machine learning and all kinds of things, but the ability for the model to get closer in prediction in math testing and back testing of the math is constrained. It is the data itself that make a difference. So when people argue, well, use my model or use this model, or should I use now in the AI world, Should I use Claude or should I use Gemini or should I use Copilot? The answer is it's horses for courses, things for different purposes. But if you don't get your data right and use the best quality now, and there's not this data is good and that's bad. There's a continuum. It depends on your budget. It also depends on what you can actually go and do. I get very frustrated when I deal with big organizations who will spend so much time and money on the most detailed study, and then next week they got to go and do something, and they didn't build their insights research based on what you could actually do. So you have to level the insights to what you can activate against. Right now, when everyone's struggling with resilience and economic challenges, the research has to feed the business outcome, and suppliers have to help people choose the right tool for the right job. And geodemography is getting a lot of resurgence because it's helping people get answers quickly. It's helping people move across the enterprise. It used to be we'd have a user in real estate department or we'd have a user in marketing. Now we have users in real estate, marketing, finance, advertising, corporate strategy, brand, because one of the things about geodemography, it levels the playing field. It allows you to look at disparate data sources through the same lens. So data
Hmm.
that you couldn't previously join together gets joined together by a segmentation system that may be a customized version of a commercial off-the-shelf segmentation system that belongs to a bank or belongs to a telco. Their version of it, when you use geodemography across the enterprise and you use it in tools that are optimized to get your value out of it, you can get answers that you can put into action in a much more timely fashion at a much better cost than, a $500,000 custom study. Now, there's places when you might need a $500,000 custom study, but there's a lot of places where all of the effort that's gone in to building an integrated data set and putting it into a tool that has workflows and reports that our industry has built over decades all over the world. Like the workflows in my system now, which is called Envision, I learned from Richard Weber. I learned from Bruce Carroll. I learned from Bill Goldstein. I learned from Michael Adams, who was my co-founder in Environics Analytics. He was a pollster who brought the concept of measuring social values, more commonly called psychographics. He brought a proprietary technique for measuring psychographics that was built in Europe. He brought that to Canada. And when he decided to fund my initiative to start Environics Analytics, we had this idea of what if we could combine a true accepted measure of values, not just behavior, but values with the geodemographic thing. So when we built the first prism for Canada, we owned
This
it,
is
we built it.
Environics.
Environics, yeah. We built it, we owned it, we licensed the brand. Some people get confused and think was the US prism applied to Canada. Just as a segue, that would never work because we have,
It's francophone population. Yeah, different geography. Yeah.
25% of Canadians' first language is French, and they're in a contained set of geography. 20% of Canadians are immigrants, and we have 10 times as many immigrant groups that are a significant portion.
Yeah.
So
You're
the
not
US,
even literally not even working off the same census data. It's not even the same
yeah,
questionnaire. So
yeah,
that's
yeah.
impossible in so many different ways.
So we built a segmentation system from the ground up for Canada. But one of the things we built a very granular system underneath it. We call them nanoclusters. And then we combined the nanoclusters with the survey research that drove the value system. Now, any smart person will tell me it's not true that people who live in the same postal code all have the same attitude towards politics, towards big business, towards the environment. So values are different. But when you look at the propensity to hold certain values at the postal code level, and then you add it up over your whole customer database or all the people who are participating in a social program, we see trends of a correlation, demographics and values. A lot of other businesses in the geodemographics business have used geodemographics as a surrogate for values. That's pretty good,
Okay.
but it's even
Okay.
better when you can combine actual values research. So we have a product called Social Values, which we built for Canada, and then we also built it in the US and shared it with Claritas based on Michael Adams' work, which as you referenced, is documented in the great book called Fire, which shows the difference in values and attitudes between Canadians and Americans. Previous to that, Michael had a book called Sex in the Snow, which was a book about the values of Canadians, which is also an interesting book. But Fire and Ice really captured the fact that if you go by state, if you go by age, if you go by different kinds of groups, there's big differences in terms of how Canadians and Americans think. And that work has continued over the years to show the changes and the differences and how different groups move. So it was very exciting for me when we started Environics Analytics to be able to combine the work of geodemographics with the social values research and create something new. We also, at that point in time, had progressed past the proliferation of the customer database and CRM. I know you're probably too young to remember, but in 1998, 1999, all that was happening in every business was we were finally getting customer data cleaned and organized and usable. And so originally for direct marketing, but eventually for, that much more consumer insight. So now we had all the larger brands who interacted with consumers. We're keeping the name and address, and we're starting to market directly one-to-one. We had, first of all, you have the panic. Well, now if people have all this great data for themselves, why are
Why
they
do
going
they
to
need
use our postal
geodemographics?
code stuff, right? So Bruce and I authored a paper called Why in the World of One-to-One Marketing Would Anyone Ever Use Geodemography? And there's 10 reasons, and we presented it all over the place. Very well known now. Geodemography is the denominator. If you know who your customers are, you want to calculate market share. You want to calculate
Hmm.
untapped potential. If
Yeah.
you have a lot of information about your customers, you don't have everything. If I spent a lot of money last week at a certain brand, you don't know if I'm a mother or a grandmother spending money on kids' clothes. So, geodemography enhances the customer data. It helps you understand untapped potential. It's easy to understand. You can link together disparate data sources and get the same view. So there was an era there when there was almost like a competitive thing between the modeling firms and the predictive analytics firms and the geodemography. And what we said was, well, let's bring the two things together. So even in the CompuSearch days, CompuSearch's owner, which is a Blackburn group, and eventually Polk, had invested in a list business and a modeling business and a CRM business, and CompuSearch and these companies kind of worked together. But towards the end of that era, we kind of merged them together. So when I started, I said, we're going to embrace the CRM world. And it was just at the time when a lot of people were facing the challenge, like CEOs were saying, well, we spent $1 zillion on our CRM, but it hasn't really changed our business result. And there was a backlash against the CRM movement in sort of the early 2000s where people said, well, we got all our systems together and we've got all our customer data together. The truth was there was a gap between the technology vendors helping people get their data cleaned and organized and the analysts not really knowing what to do with it.
To do with it.
Yeah, for me, it was really exciting when geodemography and the CRM world merged together. So we put in our wealth data and our demographics and our vulnerability indices into people's customer databases. And in our latest version of our platform, you can actually point at the customer database in its cloud stored environment and bring that data into our system to analyzing using our bespoke geodemographic tools. So I think I always say to people, let's not have a war about which kind of data is better. Businesses right now need to do an inventory of what data do we have? What data are available to me? What's the right combination of data for a specific analytics purpose? And what are the right methodologies and routines to leverage the data and go and do something so that we can actually put the results into action? And so every time there was an advance in technology, I think that one of the things we did a good job of, and I have a great team at EA, I'm not taking credit myself. One of the things we did was leverage the past, but think about the future.
The same thing is happening right now, Jan, with AI. And there's going to be this moment where there's a huge amount of excitement, and there's going to be a moment where people are like, but it didn't do what I thought. And then you're going to be there and you're going to be ready to apply geodemographics to it, which is, you're already onto
I
this. So
think,
you've
you
seen
know
it
what I
happen so
think?
many
I think
times.
we're all already there. The hype curve and the fall off, as the analysts call it, I think is accelerated with AI like it did with everything else. 2 years ago, people were trying to figure this thing out. And then people were using AI to record meetings and create their agendas, right? Now we have built agentic AI into the development of our data tools. We had a huge rewrite of a whole bunch of what I would call geodemographic workflows. We took it out of one tool into another. It was done entirely by Claude, showing people how to
Hmm.
rewrite their old code into Python code. And that's embedded in the new version of our platform, Envision, which is a new cloud-centric platform built with ArcGIS as a foundation, but built with a layer of all kinds of geodemographic workflows on top. And you can query it with AI. So if people are not bringing agentic AI into data development and into QA and into code writing, they're going to be left behind. And they worry that, it's going to take away people's jobs. I can tell you this. I have so much more opportunity on my new product development list than we can ever cope with. It's not just a matter of going and hiring a bunch of people. I can't hire enough people fast enough to do all the things that we could do in the data world, leveraging, like I say, the foundations of geodemography, CRM, GIS, bringing all these things together now with AI. And the one thing we missed in the middle was the mid 2000s when everything became digital. So then people just a little bit of history. People said to me, "Oh my God, you're dead now that people have got their own customer data." Then they said, "Oh my God, you're dead now that we're going digital." Then now AI. Every time there's been this huge shift in what tools and opportunities are there. So whenever all the spend started to move towards digital advertising, then, flyer drops and direct mail and looking at merchandising and shelf planning around store formats, that was like, oh, well, that's all terrestrial. Now the digital stuff is going to take over. But what actually happened was we found tools to be able to link what we understand about the behavior of small cohorts of people, privacy compliant. How do you find those people out there in programmatic, in connected TV, in socials? How do we find those people in ways we can target them? And Canada's very strict around privacy. So we had to build a lot of privacy enhancing technologies to use sensitive data in the digital ecosystem in a way that's not just compliant with the law, but actually goes more than that. It gets us an international privacy by design designation so that we can take the power of geodemography into the digital ecosystem and partner with platforms and publishers, with DSPs and with SSPs and with ad exchanges so that people can take the insights that they got from our Prism or our wealth data or our behavior data, buy against it, and now in our collaboration platform, measure if it actually works. So, I see the great revolutions with the introduction of desktop computing, the links to CRM, the advanced mapping systems, going digital, and now AI. To me, it's just another exciting opportunity to do more with what we already have.
I've got two burning questions that I can't get over, so I have to ask you. There's a pattern between you, Jonathan Robin, and Richard Weber, and it's you guys all worked for the government at some point. And I can't remember to the extent that Jonathan Robin did, that he was involved with it, but I feel like it was a national study. Richard Weber did a study of deprivation in a very relatively small area. Maybe I was like London. What is the pattern there? Why did all three of you do that? It can't be a mistake.
Well, I can't speak for Jonathan. I of course met Jonathan, but I didn't know him well. But Richard and I are simpatico. I was in London last year and we had lunch and he took me around to show me all the great work that's being done in London, creating new housing hubs and dealing with social purpose, things that he's following in his retirement.
It's
And
literally what he was working on in the 1970s.
yeah, and so I'm a '60s girl. I went to Woodstock. I was involved in the women's liberation movement, the fight against racism in Canada. I'm a big believer in justice and equity. And when I worked for the government, I had the opportunity to use data for what I would call social purpose. So I think some of those things are the drivers. But I think the other thing is like people say to me, oh my God, I can't, you're an entrepreneur and you're creative. I can't believe you work for the government. Every moment that I worked for the government, I was working with data. I was working in the statistics area. As I mentioned, I started working there as an analyst and I ended up running the department for Ontario. It enabled me to do federal provincial negotiations about what kind of data were important
Yeah.
to make Canada stronger.
You had that 50-person team and you were talking to all these different organizations, getting a
Worked
framework for what they wanted.
worked for the different analysts across the different kind of silos in the provincial government. And then I sat at the table with the other provinces. And if you know something about Canada, Canada is a federation of 10 provinces and now 3 territories, all of which have quite a bit of diversity. So I think it taught me a lot about negotiation and collaboration. One of the
Okay.
things that Environics Analytics has is about 30 partnerships that are essential to us. I don't believe that you have to do everything yourself. And I know that Richard was a great partnership person as well in how he helped build his business. So number one, you have to learn how to collaborate across silos and people that really have different mandates. The second thing is I do think that data makes people's lives better. And I think that's something that all of
Yes.
these leaders believe. It's not just a matter of an interesting business to be in. It's if you want to do things that make things work better. And sometimes when we talk about data for good, you have these purists who say, well, that's okay if you're helping healthcare and you're helping education and you're helping, special populations make sure they're not just, that's data for good. But I also will argue that if you're a really busy person working 2 jobs, you got to pick your kids up from daycare, you're trying to make ends meet, you're trying to work in your community, give back to your community. If you got to pick up dinner on the way home, it's important for the right products to be in the right place. It's important for you to get the right message. So I sometimes get in trouble when I argue that the business and the marketing purposes of data make people's lives better. But I believe it
Yeah.
does. There's no
No, I do
reason
too.
why we should have chaos out there. We have the capacity in Canada and the United States and many countries of the world. We have the capacity to harness data. And now with AI more than ever to harness data to really make people's lives better. And I'm passionate about doing that. I
Yep.
don't know if
Yep.
Richard would agree, but I kind of think he would.
No, I think it's in the spirit, and I think that cities are mankind's greatest invention. It's one of our greatest technologies that we've built is cities. And then at the front door of cities is retail because it's what we interact with. And so I'm right there with you in thinking if we can design retail around the way that people's values actually play out, not their income, not their demographics, their values, then I think we've done a really important thing, quietly important thing for society. There's another question that I have for you. At the beginning of geodemographics, what I am hearing you say is there was a lot of collaboration. What was going on? Like what is unique about this and why didn't there wasn't a feeling of competitiveness? Everyone is kind of sharing some of these thoughts and papers. What's going on there? What was unique about the industry?
Well, one of the things you notice is that, and my experience is mostly with UK and the US and Canada, but there aren't a lot of firms who did it, right? There were 2 or 3 in the US. There were a couple that started in Canada, and then 2 or 3 in the UK. It's quite an expensive business to run. Doesn't have the same profit margin. I've had investors and buyers say, "Oh, well, it's platform. Once you've got it out there, you should be able to get your margin up." But the secret sauce for me is kind of a combination of data, know-how, which I also call methodology, which gets embedded in technology. So it's data and methodology driven technology. Then there's still the people component. So when we license data in Canada, we actually have what we call client advocates or account managers who devote a significant number of hours, not to training, not to support, but to actually rolling up their sleeves and being an extension of the licensee's team to say, what's the problem you're trying to solve? Here's the 2 or 3 ways in which our tools would help you. So I believe that the reason why we've been successful is we've had partners and investors who've seen that it isn't strictly a platform business or a data licensing business, that it's a way of putting the consulting on the chip, putting the expertise around what you do. And so that's a business model that I think you have to have a lot of resilience. I mean, even in building CompuSearch, I saw the ups and downs because you have to invest in technology and know-how, and then you have to get the customers, and then you have to retain the customers. Time when I owned the business myself with Environics Analytics, but there was we had good growth, but you always have to be, if you want to really be expanding across industries and across organizations, you have to build new product. So it might be self-serving, but I think it's a hard business. It's a hard business. And in Canada, it's a small market. And so we took we're going to do this, but we're going to let other people use our data. We're going to bring other people's data into our ecosystem. And I think that comes from kind of a customer demand. If you're customer centric and customers are doing more with less, the economy has its ups and downs. So customers expect suppliers, or at least customers appreciate it when suppliers work together and explain the difference between what their market research vendor's doing, what their direct marketing vendor's doing, what their digital ad tech vendor's doing, or even better, if 3 or 4 vendors come to the table together and work with the customer on a solution, then I think that's really important. And I think that's why the Geodemographics business, which is very specialized, has succeeded where people have collaborated. And, you don't want collusion, but we have said, look, this is your swim lane. This is my swim lane. There's this place in the middle where maybe we're going to bump into each other, but let's not stop that from working together to make life easier for our customers, because
I
customers
love
don't have
that.
time to navigate this, all these different suppliers. When I ask my marketing people to write, the overview of what we do, and everybody's anxious, like, you just got to have 20 words. Well, my elevator pitch takes about 54 floors, so we better be so people write the elevator. What are we? We're a company that helps you turn data into insights and into blah, blah, blah. Like every ad agency and every marketing consultant would have that same mandate. So, the complexity of what we do for an analyst or a CEO has to be bringing data into a usable ecosystem that allows people to take action and change their outcome, change their business result. And I think that the people that I've mentioned and the companies that I've worked with over the years have been really good at collaborating.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that what I'm hearing you say is that uniquely in this industry, one, because it was tough and we understood each other, and then the second thing was it was nichey, right? There's a very specific science around it. So you're like talking to someone who had the experience of like naming the segments, which is difficult, but it wasn't. It was so like we were really trying to focus on getting the end customer the best results, and it feels like everyone was on that same page. So collaboration kind of helped everybody. Um, there's another thing that I wanted to ask you, kind of hearing about it, and I'm thinking of your story. You had this moment when you were, I think it was, I might get this wrong, so sorry if I do, but you were at CompuSearch. I think Polk buys CompuSearch, and then you negotiate the sale of some of CompuSearch assets over to Map Info, which was a great move, by the way. And then there's this kind of like gap in the market, and you're waiting. And this is almost the moment where you're about to start Environics. You mentioned people being so important as a part of this. You gathered a team. How have you thought about developing people, and how have you thought about picking talent and growing Environics?
Well, I had, the great opportunity because I was president of CompuSearch for its last 7 years. And essentially in our business, you need really great data people. You need people who can put that data into software. You need people who understand banking versus government. So when I decided to build Environics Analytics, first person that I partnered with was a technology person who had got us into early indexed databases in the last couple of years at CompuSearch, a technician, a technical IT leader. And then I convinced the person who had been one of the top sales, customer facing people. And then brought on board, this is in the development of the business plan, the couple people, 3 people who had really been instrumental in developing segmentation systems, and then the lead developer on software. So number one, I think that you have to have a clear idea of very specific skill sets. And it's a challenge because, sometimes when you have the best geeky data analyst in the room, and then 20 years later, you're expecting them to manage a team of 60 people, sometimes the geeky people don't have the people skills. So
I hear you.
I think the secret for me was a group of people who'd worked together 10 plus years. Every
Hmm.
person in our founding group had already worked together for 10 plus years. So we understood
Cheat
each other,
code.
and understood the strengths and weaknesses. And then, people talk about left brain, right brain. I think part of my skill is I do have a pretty good balance when we do those personality tests. I'm a red aggressive, but I'm a team player, and I'm a people person, and I'm a blue analytical person. But
Do
the
you know
truth,
your Myers-Briggs?
it's not Myers-Briggs, but we do something called color insights, which is very similar.
Okay. All
And
right.
so
But
I'm
do you
pretty
know your
square.
Myers-Briggs?
Sorry?
Do you know your
No,
Myers-Briggs?
no, I haven't
Okay.
done, at least if I did, we moved over to color insights, but it's very similar. But what it shows is I have a balance in those 4 things. I'm a little bit more red, which is your aggressive, outgoing driver, but I'm also very strong on the blue analytics, and I believe in team building. I'm good on that. So, but the truth is that those 8 founder, we had to get the balance amongst ourselves. And even now today, so we've got about 280 people. I have a large leadership team, between 15 and 20. But when we put groups of people to do cross silo planning and building, we actually say, well, how many greens and yellows have we got? How many reds have we got? How many blues? Our company has an inordinate profile of blue personalities, which are analytical, everything's black and white. We would need that. So if you compare our company to GenPop, we're very analytical. But when we want to make sure that we're building career paths and training and bringing in young people and people from diverse populations and neurodiversity, we make sure that we start a working group meeting by everybody explaining what color they are and how their thought process works. So, because I used to get so upset with the techie guys when we'd say, okay, we've got to build something new. And they'd say, the problem is, and I'd say, don't start with the word the problem is. But now I've understood that that's their job. So now when they say the problem is, I say, okay, is it a big problem or a small problem? What can we do about it? Because that's the thought process. So I think that the key to talent is understanding who people are and making sure they have the qualifications to do the job that they're responsible for, but making sure that they have the respect across leadership. And then inside in any working group, make sure you have the balance. Teamwork, being one team, is absolutely essential to bringing I'm sure for every business, but in a very technical world, respect, teamwork. And you don't get that unless you have clear leadership and people know the North Star. Our North Star is to build great data, make it easy for people to use, make sure it's safe from a brand point of view, which means it has to be more than privacy compliant. So best quality data delivered in platforms that's safe and effective, that's measurable, and making sure that everyone, regardless of what their job is, knows how what they do fits into that North Star mission of
Do you
doing
have a
those.
North Star metric as along with that, or is that mission fulfilled through multiple metrics?
No, we have a process in our planning, which we've been doing for years, called Top 5, and everybody has their 5 goals for the year. And I have mine for the company, and all the people who report to me have theirs. And they don't necessarily nest, but everyone has to think about how, so for example, mine cover all the things you would think, product, people, revenue, etc. So everyone doesn't have their 5 in those same categories, but the ones that everyone has fit somehow into their team goals and into the corporate goals. And so the other thing we find that we had to do is we've had to bring the agile process from the software development into the management. So we make our goals, and then at the end of the quarter, we say, do we have to change our goals? and not necessarily the corporate ones, but do we have to change our priorities? So halfway through last year, for example, we had to reset our priorities because with the things that were happening in the geopolitical world and the tariffs and everything, Canadian business was a little slow. And so we had to say, okay, well, what are the 5 things this team or that team could do differently? So we try as a team to have KPIs for the year and then short-term measurements of that. And we have to know that we're going to have to drop this one because that one's more important. Being agile in terms of what your objectives are and how you measure it is really important, but also communicating to everyone about what those priorities are so that people know that what they're working on are the things that are going to make a difference. Then
You
finally,
gotta
even in that process, even though you have to be agile and you have to think about the next quarter, you also have to think about the next year. So it's always a balance between long term and short term.
I think you certainly got a skill there because building the organization to 280 people, and I think when I think about the 2 words I use, respect and trust, I think it comes from the people. That's like my initial gut reaction to it. I want to talk about how Environics is carrying the torch of geodemographics now and into the future. So, can you tell us what you guys are up to now and the use cases that you're focusing on?
So we continue to build, we produce databases annually and we produce, as I mentioned, we've just last year launched a complete relaunch of our Envision platform. It was around for 14 years and we rebuilt it in a totally cloud native environment running on Kubernetes, making use of ArcGIS from our partners from Esri, but essentially building all kinds of analytical layers. And we continue to invest heavily in that platform, but we've taken that platform, we've built it in a way that it's a series of services so that people can access it through our interface or they can use call our API. So it used to be that people could use our API in their applications and use our data that way, but now they can use our data and our functionality from our Envision platform. So building a componentized platform that's cloud delivered that feeds our database into our users who are using our application as well as enabling them to use their application means that we're extending our reach. So if you have already built a whole lot of reports in your BI team and now your AI team is producing results to management or to different parts of your organization, you can make use of our geodemographic functionality in the way that you want to. That's number 1. Number 2, we haven't talked about this at all, but we are leveraging mobile phone movement data. And that's a big part of what our industry is doing. We found that in Canada, because the privacy laws have been strict for so long, Canadians turn their phone off at 10 times the rate of Americans turn location off in their phone. And so when you're trying to understand the patterns, even though we can get large North American feeds from GPS providers, they've been declining, but there's still substantial amounts of data. We found that we needed to supplement those data in Canada by using anonymized, privacy endorsed signals from cell towers. So we're launching this year our new version of MobileScapes, which has more robust samples. And the reason why that's so important is rather than just looking at footfall, this is the number of people who went to this store or to this facility. We're tying all of that population pattern movement into our core data. So not only can we tell you what the volumes of foot traffic are, but we can tell you where people came from, what segment they belong to, what social values they hold. So if you're a retailer now, you can see who lives in your trade area, who works in your trade area, who comes into your trade area on Thursday night when the bars are open. And you can really understand all of our other geodemographic information, bringing it into that weekly view of who was there on Thursday night versus Saturday afternoon, and bringing the geodemographic attributes of those phone signals together with the population movement. That's number 2.
No, it was a real quick question on that. The methodology that you were doing, we need to bring that to US too, because we need that, right? This mobile phone data is sort of going in this direction. That's going to improve things. Does this help? It definitely helps with estimated visits, but does it help with the definition of the trade areas, or can you only
Absolutely.
use like the original? Okay, so
No,
okay,
absolutely. For years, we've used people's customer data to look at, the splining techniques that say you get 80% of your customers this way, or you can divide into. But now these data can be a surrogate for a lot of retailers who don't have data to see how far people are traveling,
right.
and
Yeah,
what
restaurants, yeah.
neighborhoods they're coming from. So you get your profiles, you get your distance decay. This is all built into the new Envision platform. You don't
Yeah,
even need
and
to
you were
do the
gonna say
math.
number 3, and I kinda cut you off there.
Number 3 is the last part of our new business, which is building the data collaboration services. So we're running it as a separate business because we're enabling 2 organizations to combine together their actually sensitive or PII driven first party data. So we're not using it for product. It's on the other side of a wall and it's got a ton of data governance and orchestration layers. So we've got something that we call the EA Vault, which is a clean room environment where 2 sets of disparate data, for example, data from 2 organizations might want to combine their customer data together, but they have different permissions. So inside our clean room, we can combine it using privacy best practices. We can do analysis. We can look at the overlap or the white space using Prism or other data. So look at ad exposures versus who actually went into a grocer and buy stuff. So the retail media application. So we've built clean room. In Canada, we don't use identity graphs. We don't keep a persistent graph of me and every phone number and my IP address and all my different email addresses. That doesn't sit well in terms of our privacy framework. But inside this collaboration business, we've built the capability for using data coming into a clean room and using the permissions that the data owner has to help measure advertising lift and effectiveness and to help 2 organizations send messages to each other's customers in privacy compliant ways. So that collaboration business, we also partnered with LiveRamp, which is a global provider of data collaboration services, and their efforts to come into Canada to be a part of their global network were dependent on having a partner who understood the Canadian privacy laws. So we've taken their technology, their ad tech ecosystem pipes, we've built a Canadianization layer on top of that in terms of data, workflows, and privacy in our EA Vault system. And then we've made that link out into the ad tech system. So it's a bit of a long explanation, but the new business, originally it was okay, here we're doing insight. And we were already helping with activation, but now we have a safe way that multiple brands can organize data so that they can measure, the old adage, I know 50% of my advertising is working. I just don't know which 50%. We can actually measure. We're talking connected TV, we're talking programmatic. We can help people understand reach and frequency across screens and across media. And we can make all of that analysis really interesting by bringing the geodemographics into it. And so there's a lot of different kind of clean room providers where we use some of the clean room technology that we get from LiveRamp. We partner with Snowflake. We've had people who've got their data in AWS clean rooms. So, the clean room is a container and there's interoperability into our collaboration services. And I'm really excited about this as being the next frontier because you can imagine how much AI agents are going to be able to help. If you've got 2 huge sets of customer data being combined and you need to know what permission is associated with each signal or each piece of information, and then you bring the geodemographics on top of that. The geodemographics is often a great way of summarizing sensitive data into small
Yes.
cohorts. So you said this to me the other day, and I think it's such an important point, and I'm so aligned with this. Geodemographics is a great way to solve some of the new challenges of privacy. We've been dealing with that in Canada for 25 years, GDPR type. As US businesses and suppliers deal with that, geography is a great way of grouping data to the smallest spatial scale that makes sense to give
Mhm.
you privacy compliance and also statistical reliability. And that's a subject for another day. How small should we go and how do we create cohorts of sensitive data so that they become usable in
Right.
ways that consumers and residents and citizens expect and still drive your really good use of
Right.
data? Geodemography helps tremendously in that way.
Yeah, the way that I see it is like you could see this potential future of you're doing like one to one. You are using a singular person's data and you're communicating to them based on singularly how they interact. And people have already said, I don't want that. That's creepy, and I also feel invaded. But I think geodemography is a great opportunity for the future to be privacy compliant as well as provide that personalized experience for that person, because you're aggregating them into a group of people that is safe, right? And it's still crazy that we're using Tobler's law and it
Yeah,
works, in the digital advertising sphere. So
it's
I
great.
think that has a huge opportunity. Plus, the way the LLMs work is I think they interact really well currently with lots of text, but not so. I've just not experienced them working really well on, like, here's a set of tables. Some people can get it to work that way. I feel like they work better with text, and geodemography can be explained in text in a really nice way. And that gives them something to run with.
Well, what the point we didn't touch on before is how much clusters and segments through Prism and Mosaic and Acorn and Lifestyles and all the things that I've been familiar with, how much they help executives understand. Some people say, "Oh, well, this profile, I already knew that was my customer." But when you go to your boss and you say, these are the kinds of people, the fact that Michael Weiss, who is the master of naming. Michael named the original prism. He named our prisms and many other segments in between, and he actually
He
led
gives the
market.
credit to Robin Page for that, but yeah, I knew
No, no,
he knew.
Mike, I don't know if you know this. Michael was the head of our marketing at Environics
I
Analytics for
know.
10
Oh
years.
yeah, I know.
He flew up
Yeah.
from the US and he was responsible for so much of our growth. But we would build a new segmentation system every 5 years and we would sit around a table and Michael would study the data and come with a descriptor for a segment. As a matter of fact, he'd come with 50 possible ones. And he would say, you can't use that because so and so's already used it. And he could capture in all those different segments. And the ability to name and draw segments is still one of the most powerful things because it helps other people who aren't statistics driven understand. So that's a key thing that now the LLMs can help us. As a matter of fact, we just used AI to redraw pictures of our segments for some updates in our system that we're launching on April 30th. We actually had AI help with the regeneration of some new segmentation sketches. So the possibilities are endless, and learning from the way Michael's mind thought about it, the agents are going to be able to help us do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Jan, this has been a pleasure for me getting to talk to you for an hour and 15 minutes. And I feel like I have so many more questions. You've only opened up more questions in my mind. So, but maybe for a later discussion. But yeah, I just really respect what you've built. The first time I talked to you, I was so intimidated by you. And it's good getting no, because you're
Please
smart.
no.
Just because you're smart. And it's been good getting to know you and watch you from afar, and now getting to talk to you sort of in person about this. If people wanted to know more about Environics Analytics, how do they find out more about you and about the company?
So I'm Jan.Kestle at environicsanalytics.com. I'll answer any email that anybody sends me. And, on the environicsanalytics.com, there's tons of information there. We have a user conference once a year. That's one of the biggest marketing events in Canada, 1,000 people. We have webinars all the time on the launch of our new products. We participate in all of the industry associations in Canada and some international ones. You can usually find us at ICSC. So just reach out. Happy to talk to people about our products and services, but I'm also always happy to talk to people about new ideas about where we're going to go. And I was so delighted the first time that you reached out to me. And so I commend you for your journey as well as learning from the technology that you were first involved with. Coming around, I didn't get a chance to mention one of my great mentors is Jack Dangerman, who, starting from put an app in your map to everything happens somewhere. Now, Jack talks all the time about the science of where and how geography is a great integrator in this new AI and database driven world. And I think that you and a lot of other young people and young entrepreneurs are really understanding place and the power of where as an integrating capability. And, I'm not a geographer, but probably more than half of the people in my country might have geography degrees and training and specialization because it's the way of the future. AI and geography coming together are going to make a big difference for how data get to shape business decisions. So thank you.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you, Jan.